Hey guys, the following is a compilation of some of the many Nirvana interviews I've done over the years.
Is there one thing about Kurt that he would want the world to know about himself that hasn't really been talked about yet?
It's hard for me to say what he would want, but because I can't really speak for him at all. But what I would say, just having been his friend and having been in that scene, is I would think that he would be kind of embarrassed about all the sort of deification that's happened to him. Because I think he just felt like a human, like a kind, hardworking, passionate human. And that I think that he was just trying to, make friends and get his feelings out and meet people and express them and go back and forth. And, when creativity really gets going, it's not just you. It's like a whole bunch of people around together. And see, for me, just having been friends with him and stuff, I can never see him as the world's most famous person, like sometimes, or like as some giant rock star. Well, I mean, I know that he's that, but when I see it on TV and they're talking in a way that's talking about him like he's a god or something, it drives me crazy because I'm like, no, he was a human. He had problems. He had flaws. He had sensitivities. He was wonderful. He was creative. He was dynamic.
Nirvana were huge. They were a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, I was just on vacation actually in California, and we saw quite a few Nirvana t-shirts. Still. Yeah, right around Christmas of 88, between, that little period between Christmas 88 and January 89 was when we were working on the Bleach record. There was a session, I think, in June of 88 where we did the Love Buzz single and a couple of other songs. And most of that stuff got re-recorded for Bleach.
I know you guys did the whole thing in about 30 hours, the whole Bleach record.
Yeah, give or take.
How was the session?
They were really prepared. We were recording on 8-track, so you don't have a lot of opportunity to overproduce things. It's got to sound good. It's got to be played good right off the bat because, you've got like 3 drum tracks and a couple of guitar tracks and a bass track and a vocal track. And that's it. That's what you got. So it needs to be as good as it can be, because you can't rely on, overdubbing and studio trickery to make it sound big. And they were a band that had a good sound at the time. They simply sounded good, and they were good at playing their songs, and they were prepared. And Kurt was a good singer. There was no downside. I mean, all I had to do was, make sure that the sounds I got were good sounds and then press record and get out of the way. That's what it's like recording a good band. I was the one that gave their tape to Sub Pop because I thought they were so good. I wanted people to listen to it. I was a big fan right from the moment they walked in the studio the first day. I wanted to join the band. I was, kept thinking to myself, wow, I wonder if they need a second guitarist. I'd love to play with these guys.
Did you ever ask them?
No. But I remember it crossed my mind. I was thinking, these guys, they're really good, but I had a band. And that doesn't happen that often that I'm thinking to myself, wow, it'd be fun to play with this band, But they were that kind of band.
Nirvana were peers. We were sort of the same scene. They were in an unusual circumstance in that they had gotten famous, But I still considered them peers. I considered them part of the same circle that we had all grown up in. So working with Nirvana was not intimidating in that respect. The pressure that they were under, was immediately apparent to me that they were in a different world in that regard. The first day everyone was congregated at the studio, they didn't all live in the same place. So getting them together for a meeting or whatever obviously took some wrangling. They all convened at the studio, and the very first day at the studio, someone came in with a manila envelope full of legal documents that they all had to sign. Just a stack of them, And they were everything from some functional thing, like this is so that you can collect royalties on radio play in territories controlled by Australia. All right, okay, well, fine, whatever. All right, this is so they can use a photograph of you on a magazine cover to promote this thing. Okay, whatever. This is a lawsuit where somebody had a band called Nirvana and he wants to get paid off because your band is called Nirvana. Okay, here, fine, fuck it, whatever. This is some kid who broke her leg at a show and wants you to pay something extra because you were playing it. Okay, fine, fuck it, whatever. Just a stream of these things came in the very first day. I've never had to deal with anything like that in my life, But that was just, another day in the band of Nirvana for them. They just had to deal with shit like that constantly. So it was obvious to me that they were under, pressures of a different magnitude than anybody that I dealt with. And so I tried to make a point of not pressing them for any indulgences. Like, I didn't pretend to be an intimate friend with any of them. They had all these people that were trying to leech onto them and trying to weasel their way into their inner circle. I didn't want to be one of those people. They had people asking them for things constantly, mementos or indulgences or tickets or autographs or pictures. Like, I didn't want to be one of those people. So I gave them not just space, but autonomy and a distance between them and me that respected how much they already had to put up with, and that I wasn't going to be an additional burden to them.
How did your relationship start with Nirvana?
I'm pretty sure they heard some of the early Soundgarden recordings I had done, which ultimately became the Screaming Life record.
Nirvana heard that EP?
Yes, yeah. I think they would have heard that. They would have heard the Screaming Life EP, which I think came out in late 87. I could be wrong, but I think so. They called me in 1988, January 1988, and Kurt called, and he just wanted to come up and record a few songs, make a demo basically, and they didn't have a band name. And Dale Crover was playing drums with him at the time, just as a fill-in drummer. They didn't have a permanent drummer. And of course, Dale knew me. I'd known the Melvins for quite a while. Skinyard had played with them a few times. And Kurt, of course, being from Aberdeen, didn't know a lot of people in Seattle at the time, I don't think. But Dale probably, I'm thinking Dale maybe gave me a recommendation. I don't really know that. But Dale knew what I was doing and knew my band and knew the records I was making. And also, I'm pretty sure that Kurt heard some of the Soundgarden recordings I'd already done. At least so I've been told. Again, the internet, there's a lot of information out there. Make what you will of it. But in any case, he seemed to know that I was the guy he wanted to record with right then. And so they came up and recorded 10 songs with me on January 23rd, 1988. And we recorded and mixed all 10 songs in 5 hours, basically one afternoon. And some of those songs in that actual form, and I mean, I spend about an hour per song. No, 15 minutes per song mixing those songs, because I think we mixed the 10 songs in, just over 2 hours. Those mixes are the ones that ended up on Incesticide.
Really?
Yeah, which always made me think, gee, maybe if somebody gave me a chance to, spend an extra
10 minutes,
2 or 3 hours, maybe those mixes would be even better than they are, but they're not bad mixes. They're all right. I knew what I was doing at the time, so they don't sound bad. But, I know I could have made them a little bigger, beefier or whatever, but nobody complained.
Did you know that they went ahead with, the label went ahead with making Incesticide? Were you notified of this?
Yeah, later on, of course. Yeah, of course I was. I was, and they just went ahead and used it, and yeah, I had nothing to say about it. They'd already made the decision. I did have an outtake from Bleach that I was sitting on that I had to remind them about, which was Big Long Now. I said, "Hey, you guys, there's a song here that you forgot about. Why don't you throw that on the record?" So they put that on.
There have been several brief periods where different idiomatic elements of the underground or the legitimate music scene have been brought to the surface and have been sort of skimmed by that industry, the mainstream industry. And that sort of culminated with Nirvana becoming the biggest band in the world. And Nirvana was a band very much of their local music scene, very much like peers with and fraternal with all of the other Northwest punk bands. When they became successful on an international scale and became a huge phenomenon, then that sort of started a feeding frenzy with the big record labels, where the big record labels were trying to find other like unpolished gems in the underground music scene that they could turn into commodities like that. When that feeding frenzy died down and all of the bands that were plucked from the underground into the mainstream, like very few of those had any measure of success in the mainstream.
This was at Motorsports Garage, which was like a big show. The first show when all these photographers came from England, right when grunge broke in England. And this was at the Hub Ballroom, which was at the University of Washington. And that was before they got famous. It was the same day as the other photos for Bleach. I met Kurt through Tracy Mirander, his first girlfriend in Olympia. And Tracy and I were friends when I moved to Olympia, and I was going to the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. And I used to hang out with Tracy before she started dating Kurt. She lived at a punk rock house called the Alamo on the east side of Olympia with some other people that I knew that were in the band Danger Mouse. And, it was a pretty low-key scene. We'd go see music all the time. We'd drive up to Seattle to see music just for the night. The traffic wasn't that bad yet. You could go from here to there, no problem, just for the night. And Tracy was from Tacoma, so we'd go to Tacoma a lot. And at that time, Tracy had started dating Kurt. He was from Aberdeen, so I heard about him through her. But I never met him because, Aberdeen is the opposite way from Seattle. And none of us had a lot of money or gas to go anywhere. Tracy worked at night at the Boeing cafeteria, and so she would drive to Aberdeen a lot and hang out with him. And then eventually I met him, and my friend Bruce Pavitt started Sub Pop Records. He also had gone to Evergreen State College, I think a couple years before I did. And when I was in college there, we had a student club called Gesco. And it was, we got a lot of greeners, like, they call them greeners, the people
Evergreen?
that went to Evergreen. Yeah, greeners. Bruce Pavitt used to come down and DJ, and so we'd all dance. And I think it was before Nirvana got formed. It was right around the time Nirvana got formed. The Melvins used to be our house band there.
Really?
So, yeah, Kurt was, good buddies with those guys because they were from Montesano, the town over from Aberdeen, and so everybody knew each other. So about the time I moved back to Seattle and I started doing photography, trying to do photography professionally after I got out of college, the first person that hired me was Bruce Pavitt from Sub Pop Records to do the original Nirvana single Big Cheese, and it was for their singles club, though I think they only released 1,000 copies of each one. And so the first time I actually met Kurt was Chris Novoselic and Tracy and Bruce Pavitt came by my apartment in Belltown and picked me up. And Kurt was there, and Chad Channing was the drummer, and he lived on Bainbridge Island. Then we drove down to Tacoma and took photos at the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, and that was the cover of Big Cheese. The front cover is shot at Neverland, which was near the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in the park there. And the back cover is shot where the new bridge is. They built a second bridge, so now there's a double bridge. And right where we were standing when we took the photos was right where the new bridge is. Because there used to be a park there before they built the new bridge. So anyways, that was the first day I met Kurt. We were friends. We had a lot in common. He was pretty sensitive. I was like sensitive guys. He was my friend's boyfriend, so I was never interested in him in anything but just being friends. What was great about that scene were all the guys and girls hung out together and were equal. And there was a lot of ideas going back and forth because a lot of us were in college, and the kids that weren't in college were all talking about the same ideas that the kids were studying in college. We studied the meaning of life. And a lot of people that were friends with Kurt were also in that class, like Slim Moon from Kill Rock Stars Records, and a bunch of other people that are mentioned in some of the Nirvana songs. One time when I ran into him when he was famous, he was telling me about the video that they made for In Bloom and how they got the old film footage left over from the 60s, and they got the same camera that they used to film the Ed Sullivan Show, and they had like all these details, like they were all working in his mind, like he was creating this image. He had this idea about what he wanted to do, and it was really fantastic. You know, that's why I liked him, was because like every time we would hang out, we would sit down and have these big conversations about ideas and different things. Easily amused. I think that was about what I was telling Kurt, because my mom used to have me just take care of myself, because she was an artist. So she'd be like, here's a sketch pad and some pencils, just take care of yourself, you know, like. So I was always like, I've always been easily amused. Like I can go anywhere and just sit around and enjoy looking at things. And like that was the conversation, and I think that's where that phrase "easily amused" came from. And
That's cool.
you know, so it's taken me years to sort of remember and figure that out. But I think all the Nirvana songs are like that. There's like little pieces about like different things that happen, and so a lot of them are about like they're all from his journals that were written when he lived in Olympia and he was in the middle of that creative milieu. The beauty of what happened in the Northwest was we were isolated. So, you know, if everyone would have been trying to get a record label in Los Angeles when they were first starting out, maybe they would have been more homogenous. But here, everybody got to do their own thing because it was a punk rock standard. So we were basing all our stuff off of, like, punk rock from, like, 10 years before, like in the 70s. Like what was going on in England, what was going on in New York, what was going on in LA, you know. And so there were always influences in Seattle because of that.
You know, I think that Nirvana connected to me on a real emotional level. I look back at some of the pictures I've took. It was a real emotional release. And I think Kurt and I shared some of the same experiences of dysfunctional family growing up and divorce and chronic pain.
Did you guys ever talk about that stuff?
We talked a little bit about it. There were connections there, and I think that's the lasting, what is lasting about Kurt and his legacy is that emotional connection. You know, it isn't just the music. So yeah, I still have some darkroom prints. You know, these were all made in a traditional darkroom here.
Oh yeah.
Back in the day, but now it's primarily digital prints.
Where was this famous shot of yours taken, by the way? Which club was this?
This was at the University of Washington Hub Ballroom, which is on campus at the UW.
And this was a Nirvana gig?
Yeah, this was Nirvana and...
Turn this off.
Fluid, I think. There's
this is the very famous Kurt photo, right?
Yeah, so this is Kurt on his shoulders at the Commodore Ballroom in Vancouver, and I mean, when I took this shot, I knew there was something there. I had that moment, that like tingle up the spine, but then you just keep going, and then. But when I went to develop the film, I went straight. I knew that there was something there. So he did a somersault essentially.
What did he think of the photo?
Well, they liked it enough. They put it on the back of the Smells Like Teen Spirit single. So
really,
yeah.
So when Smells Like Teen Spirit hit big, how did that affect Nirvana and by extension the scene here?
Well, you know, I mean, it just brought in a lot of work and. You know, some heartache, of course, and you know, we were in our 20s. It just kind of kept chugging along. I mean, Nirvana were out of town. The band started being out of town a lot more.
Did you guys realize there was something special when it blew up, or not till later on?
Well, I mean, we knew there was something going on, but we just figured it would just collapse at any minute, or, you know, years from now it would just be a few record collectors that would remember it all. But
Really?
I just didn't understand that it would have some sort of longevity or fit in with the history of music.
When you're taking these photos, do you ever stop to think, wow, this is a special moment? Or do you not think that when you're shooting?
When you're in the middle of shooting, you often have a sense that this was a great moment. Of course, in the film days, it could take you a day or a week or whatever to find out if that was true, even if your lighting was right. Now you kind of have instant gratification.
When you recorded in Utero back in 1993, what exactly was the issue with Nirvana's label?
Long story short, the band recorded the album in Utero by hiring me directly, so I was never contractually bound to their record company in any way. That was a break in the paradigm of the way record companies wanted to do business. Record companies wanted to be the responsible party so that they could exert control over situations by withholding payment or demanding things, or, if your business depends on you exerting control over the people you work with, and one of those people has a successful record that doesn't obey that protocol, it's a dangerous precedent. I immediately started getting calls from journalists who were getting leaks from the record company. And one of those phone conversations was, I just got off the phone with Gary Gersh. He says he can't release the new Nirvana album and it's your fault. Would you like to comment? So it went to the very highest levels of their company, up to the very highest levels of the Capitol or Geffen or whoever it was at the time. There was an effort to shut down that record and make the band do it again. The band dug in their heels to an extent. They said, no, this is the record. We like the record. We want to release it. They had some minor complaints about some of the songs and they wanted to remix them. I had a conversation with the band where I said, well, I'll listen to everything, and if I feel like I can do better, then I'm happy to try to do another round of mixes or whatever. And I had a copy of the master, and so I listened to it all, and I honestly felt like we had wrung the sponge, like we had done the absolute best that we could to that music. And so I said, yeah, if you guys want to remix stuff on your own, you have my blessing, but I feel like I can't add anything to the process. And it seemed like if that instinct was indulged, that kind of second-guessing instinct was indulged, then it would be like a collapse. It would be a string of dominoes, in that, okay, we're going to remix this song because it's a single. Okay, we're going to remix this song because it's a second single. Okay, we're going to remix the whole album. Okay, we've remixed the whole album and they're still not happy. We're going to re-record the whole album. Okay, thanks for your efforts, but now we have to play by the book. So I felt like if I participated in that process, that it would cascade into a capitulation. And so I said, look, if you guys want to remix stuff on your own, you have my blessing. It's not my record, it's your record. And in the end, they did. They re-recorded some of the vocals backing vocals on one song, and they remixed a couple of songs. And the album that was released ultimately was the recordings that we did, that is, the band and I did. The bulk of the record were the original mixes that they did that were originally rejected. There were 2 or 3 songs, I forget, that were remixed and subsequently released as singles and included on the album. But the main thrust of that description is that the record that ended up in the stores is the record the band wanted people to hear. There was a slight difference between that record and the record that they ended up with at the end of the sessions, but that was their decision, and they decided that they wanted to release that album in that way. It's their record. They get to do that. I whatever like minor bruise to my ego there is that they wanted to remix some stuff is completely irrelevant to the fact that that band remained in control of that record and they released a record that they were proud of, right? That's the end of the story as far as I'm concerned. I was working for them. I was an employee, right? So like the guy that installs the toilet in your house doesn't get to tell you how to paint it, right? So that's my relationship with that band. And so I have no beef with the band. They were under extraordinary pressure. Like everyone around them was telling them that they had to play ball. Every single person in their orbit, all of their management people immediately wanted to capitulate because they were afraid for their careers. All of the people that worked with them and in proximity to them at the record label, they were all afraid of their careers. Everyone at the record label was afraid that they were going to have a bad quarter if the Nirvana record wasn't a smash hit. So up the entire corporate ladder, everyone was terrified of this band making their own decisions. And in the end, it's just, the record is appreciated by their audience, and that's really all that matters. The band made a record that they liked, that they were proud of, and their audience, the people with whom they had a direct relationship, appreciated that record, and that's the end of the story. The fact that there were business concerns involved is irrelevant to me.
Rock is a different aesthetic, and at times it becomes popular. Usually when there's a rock band that's very good at writing a pop song, which was what Nirvana did, people still want verses and choruses and bridges and hooks. And if rock bands deliver that, they can become popular. If the aesthetic is not going in that direction, then it's going to be more niche. And that's just how popular music has worked for decades and decades. So, that's the funny thing. Nobody really accused Nirvana of selling out. Kurt was very sensitive to that.
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm back here in Montesano at the trailer where Gary Cobain lives. Gary, thank you so much for having me in, man.
Okay.
So you had a very different life. You were in the Army, is that correct?
Yeah.
What inspired you to get into the Army?
I don't know. One day me and my buddy got drunk and I said, let's go sign up.
That's funny. Were you ever deployed anywhere overseas?
Yeah. I was in Hawaii, Germany.
Wow. How was that general experience for you?
It was different, let me tell you. It's a whole different world.
Is there any one memory you have of your military service that you're fond of?
Yeah, I went to Germany. When I was on a journey, you don't find no paper or nothing out on the roads. None. Nowhere.
Super clean over there.
Yeah, really clean. I didn't believe it. Autobahn was fun.
You went on the Autobahn?
Yeah, I drove on the Autobahn.
Wow, how fast did you go on that thing?
As fast as that car could go.
I've always wanted to check that out, actually, the Autobahn.
Oh, man, the roads are just smooth, man. The corners are banked and everything.
Really, eh?
Yeah. There's some pictures of Kurt there, and there's Courtney and Kurt and Francis. That's my kid in the corner with one of the hit.
Let me see.
Over there.
That's your kid?
No, that's his kid. And my kid's right there. Boy.
Oh, so cool. What's his name?
Christopher.
Christopher. And how old is Christopher now?
42.
42, wow. So do you have grandkids?
Yeah, that's one, and that's one. And, one with him, and that's her. One of them.
So cool.
She's just about 21 now.
That's awesome. So you're a Seahawks fan?
Yeah. This is all my dad's dad and mom, and they do their anniversaries.
Wow.
And that's my mom there too. Get it?
That's your mother?
Yeah. She used to do ballet, man.
That's cool. I'm Canadian, right? So both my parents immigrated to Canada, so I'm like a first generation Canadian.
Oh yeah?
So I'm just curious, like, how many generations in the States you guys have been?
Oh shit, who knows? My dad had what? Ernie, Burrow, Kenny. I can't remember his sister's name now.
But you guys are part Irish from what I understand, right?
Yeah, mostly Irish, yeah.
So when Nirvana got really big, like, when did you first learn that he was in a band, first of all?
It was when I got out of the service, when I first got out. I was driving down the road and I see this thing that said Nirvana on a car, and I didn't know what it was Kurt or anything until later on, until he started getting popular.
And how did that feel like seeing your nephew becoming, as famous as he did?
Fuck, I know, just like that. That was pretty cool.
Do you have a favorite Nirvana song?
No, I don't, but I like them. I like them all, really.
So the people in this park, do they know that you're Kurt's uncle?
Yeah.
And do they ever ask you questions about him or anything?
A couple of them might.
So most of this art, you said, comes from just random fans who send you stuff?
Yeah.
And you said that your mother made this one here?
Yeah, she could draw too.
So your family's artistic?
Yeah. That's where Kurt got that, I think. And the other family,
Wendy's family?
part of the family is all music. That's how he really started.
Yeah.
Mary gave him a guitar. He wanted to play the drums, but he couldn't keep beat.
What was the first sign that you got that, okay, Kurt's pretty talented? Like, when do you remember anything?
I don't know. We were at one of his uncle's places. We're all over there, I think, on New Year's Eve or something. His uncle had a band, and down below was a drum set, and he snuck down there, and you could tell he wanted that. He was good at making clay models and movies and stuff like that.
Kurt was?
Yeah, he did a whole movie. I don't know where it went, of dinosaurs and stuff. And you have to move them every little bit to make the movie.
One of the distinctive elements of In Utero, in my opinion, is the raspiness of Kurt's voice. Like, I mean, he screams on all the records, but I really find with Bleach and In Utero in particular, he's really letting loose. With a song like Tourette's, he's basically just screaming the whole time. Did he ever blow out his voice when he was recording that record?
I don't recall anything specific, although he basically sang the whole album in one go, and I think he paced it so that the less demanding songs would be early in the session, and then the harsher songs would be at the end. And then I do recall him coming in the next day and revisiting a couple of those songs, either redoing parts or whole chunks of songs.
The first song you guys did was Serve the Servants. Did you get any of the arrangements for the music before you started recording, or was everything just you get there and for the first time you're hearing these songs?
They had sent me Rio demo, which was a demo tape that they had made in Rio de Janeiro that had most of the songs from the session and a few loose jams. The arrangements were all pretty worked out, and Kurt had ideas about, for each song, he had little extra bits that he wanted to do, either a second guitar or a contrasting part he wanted to add that wasn't necessarily structural, but there would be like, okay, well, we get to this bit, it's going to be a second guitar that's going to take over or going to join. And there wasn't not a lot of it was extemporaneous. Almost all of it was, in one way or another, was worked out. Kurt had a notebook that had his lyrics and his song ideas in it. In that notebook, he also had articulated specific things about the guitar sound, like he wanted to swap amplifiers for certain songs. He used a Randall amplifier for some of it. He used, the bulk of it was this broken Fender quad reverb that he really liked. Serve the Servant specifically, I know that he used this broken quad reverb, and it was missing 3 of the 4 power tubes. So the output of the amplifier was, in technical terms, it was asymmetrical, meaning that there would be distortion on one half of the waveform and not on the other half. And that would be, an unusual thing, but it had a very harsh, distorted sound, but Kurt was actually quite fond of that harshness. And so that was a big part of that record, was him choosing a very specific voicing for each guitar.
Is there anything in particular about these sessions that stick out to you?
There are a couple of very specific things about Kurt's approach that were unique at the time and remain unique. He essentially sang the entire album in one sitting.
Really?
I think he came back the next day and did a few of the songs that, he may have redone a song or did a few of the songs that he didn't get to the first day. But essentially, we started the vocal tracking, and then we just pressed on that whole day, and he sang the whole album. That by itself is pretty unusual. His approach to singing was that while he was singing, he always wanted to be playing an instrument of some kind. In the beginning, he had this percussion instrument called a rain stick that he was toying with while he was doing the vocals. Mm-hmm. And it made this, brutal rattling sound that was picking up in the vocal microphones. And then when he heard the first playback, he was like, "Hey, can you get rid of that rain stick?" And I was like, "Yeah, sorry, that's built in, So he ended up re-singing that song, but and then he switched to this slightly broken acoustic guitar. He had this acoustic guitar that had a cracked top and had very old, very dead strings, and he would just strum along quietly while he was preparing to sing the song. And there are a couple of songs where you can hear this acoustic guitar sort of accompanying the quiet bits of the verse. And that wasn't a separate recording of an acoustic guitar. That was just the acoustic guitar he was carrying in his lap that he was using as a sort of a rhythmic confidence item during the singing. And so that acoustic guitar was a byproduct of his method of recording the vocals. I felt like he was being very square and very open with me during the session. Like he would tell me what he liked and what he didn't like, and I believed him, and he would tell me what his aesthetic inspirations were for certain things.
When it comes specifically to Kurt's screaming, I think Bleach is the best sample of how intense his screams can be. Does it take a certain technique to be able to scream like that, or how is he going about doing that?
It's not a technique thing. It's a natural thing. You either have it or you don't. It's your voice does it, your throat does it, or it doesn't. I mean, yeah, it's a technique, but I mean, he didn't have enough practice or live experience or anything else to have anything that you would call a technique. He was just natural. He had a good scream, and I was very impressed with it right from the get-go. I thought, this guy's got a great scream. He's got a good voice. I could tell that he had an interesting ear for melody, because what melodies there were interesting melodies and didn't always follow the guitar riff. So there was a little bit of thought in it. So you could just tell that he had a natural rock scream that was really good. And that was obvious right from the first chorus of If You Must, as you immediately you'd go, whoa, you'd listen to his voice, going up a notch here. So, yeah, I liked his singing right off the bat. And I believe I probably said so at the time because I remember Dale Crover agreeing with me about that exact thing.
I guess from a technical standpoint, when you're recording someone who's screaming, do you have to set the mic up in a different way than when they're not screaming, just in order so it doesn't boom out? Like, how do you go about that technically?
Technically, if I'm dealing with somebody who screams a lot, I shy away from condenser microphones entirely, which puts me slightly on the outside of a lot of recording technique, I guess. I favor dynamic microphones for rock screamers. It just sounds more natural to me. It's less sibilant. You don't get as much sort of spitty, sizzly artifacts. What we call sibilance isn't as prevalent. It doesn't tend to be as shrill. Condenser microphones, which are generally higher fidelity, tend to be not very flattering to a lot of singers who are screamy. They can make them sound very shrill and unpleasant. Strangely enough, if you give somebody a Beta 58 or a Sennheiser 421 or just a Shure SM58 or something like that, maybe put a foam thing over it so they can eat the mic, as we say, which gives them more of a feeling just like they're on stage because they're singing like this instead of into a mic that's far away. Mm-hmm. You get the proximity effect of the microphone working in your favor, but the pop filter that's over the mic is keeping the plosives from happening. Long story short, you can set up, and I've done this many times, I'll set up like 4 or 5 microphones just in a row and I'll say, okay, sing me a couple of lines of the loudest part of the song, and we'll just go through and we'll just A-B them, and we'll pick the mic. And generally with screamy singers, it's going to be a dynamic microphone. and all the expensive condensers are going to be left behind. Now, that's just my experience. Your mileage may vary. Mm-hmm. But in Kurt's case, in 1988, most likely I just had him singing into an SM58 with a pop filter, and I might have even let him hold it in his hand. Don't think so, though, because he would not have been a hand holder. He was used to playing with a guitar, so he would never have sung into the mic with it holding in his hand. I have other people do that. Mark Lanigan sang into an SM58 holding it in his hand for the Winding Sheet record. Sometimes the simple, obvious microphone is actually the best microphone to use, even though you may want to use the $5,000 microphone. It's not always the best choice. It really depends on the voice and the technique that's involved.
One of the things that, just like in like online Nirvana communities, that there's a lot of debate about is how seriously did Kurt take lyrics? Because Kurt sometimes would say publicly he didn't really prepare lyrics, he didn't really care, but then some people say no, he was very diligent with writing lyrics. In your experience, did he care a lot about the lyrics for his songs?
I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that during the Bleach sessions, there were a few songs that he literally had to stop and finish the lyrics for, like right then and there. Or maybe he had like some lines floating around in his head, but until it was time to actually do the real vocals, he hadn't crystallized it to be like, this is what the lines are going to be. And he would have to sit down for a minute and think, okay, what's the verse really going to be? I've been singing this nonsense, but now I've got these lines in my head. Let's figure it out. So he did actually finalize some of the lyrics right in front of me when we were doing the Bleach session. And I think he did that a little bit on the Dale demo as well. But I think it was more a case of just remembering what the lyrics were that he already knew. I do know that when we were doing Rape Me for the Utero demos, he did have to sit down. And he was actually trying some lines out while I was in the studio there. And he was running them by Courtney. He was going, what do you think? Should I use this line or that line? And she'd be like, yeah, that line. No, use this line. And she'd be like, yeah, you're right. That's a better line. So he was like, he was open to opinions, but he had the lines. He always had to sit down and go, am I going to sing it this way or am I going to sing it this way? Because there'd always be a few optional phrasings in his head, Mm-hmm. But I think it's fairly obvious from reading the lyrics that he spent more time on the lyrics to In Utero than he did on some of the other lyrics, because I think the lyrics just show that there's more thought in them at that point. Maybe because he was more self-conscious, which I think is very likely, because he was very self-conscious after Nevermind was a success. Mm-hmm. I know nothing about how he wrote the lyrics for Nevermind because I wasn't really present for that. But it did seem a little more casual during the Bleach and the Dale demo sessions. I think he had the lyrics written out, but, I don't think he was particularly self-conscious about it and maybe not even that ambitious about it. I am impressed that he was able to write a song like School that has 3 lines in it. And is a brilliant song with only 3 lines in that song.
Yeah.
That is some economical songwriting right there that is a lesson for people, that you can tell a whole story with very few words.
Yeah, I actually agree with you 100%.
The last few years, having gotten to speak with Jack Endino and Steve Albini and people who've actually worked with the band, it kind of corrects a lot of the false images that there are of the band out there. Like there's this kind of image that, like, sometimes Kurt is portrayed as a bit of a slacker, someone who didn't really care too much. But speaking with Steve and with Jack, they both said that he was very serious in the studio. So you had the same experience with him, essentially? Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did he approach recording vocals? Was there anything unique about his approach?
No, he just did it. I mean, he just stood in front of the microphone. It was a very good microphone. Neumann U67, same one we used for Beat Happening and anybody else that recorded there. And he just sounded great. He just was a natural born singer. Just did that. A lot of people don't understand. There were so many good singers of that generation. Like within 5 years, I recorded Sean Smith, Reggie Watts, Chris Cornell, Calvin Johnson, Kurt Cobain, Mark Lanigan, and a lot of other great singers that no one knows about, or, other people know about. So the idea that, you just, oh yeah, this is taking care of itself, but put Kurt in front of a Neumann mic, put it through this compressor, and we're in business. It just sounded perfect.
So cool.
And just happened organically and happened in one or two takes, so.
That's awesome. And was he easy to work with in the studio?
Yes.
That's cool. So
we had fun. It was a good time.
Okay, so they come to the studio, you start working with them. When did you first, was it right away you saw, okay, these guys are like he's a natural born singer, or did it take a few takes for that to come through?
Oh, I knew that from the Bleach record. They just sounded great. He had what they call it, a vocal fry. He had a place where his voice went into overtones, and I picked up all these harmonics, and it's just a classic thing that great rock singers have. And you could hear that all over the stuff. And then, believe me, I heard Bleach without ever. I don't think I ever put the record on in my house. I heard Bleach so many fucking times. By the time I recorded Nirvana, because it got played on the radio or it got played in restaurants.
What was the effect on you personally when that music you were involved with just exploded?
Well, I felt like I was right in the middle of a sort of a little renaissance of rock that was going on here in Seattle. I was right in the engine room, as it were. And I don't think any of us expected that, 4 or 5 Seattle bands would suddenly be, up in the upper reaches of the Billboard album charts, by 1991, 1992. That was a big surprise. So nobody really expected that this music would start selling again like it did. And suddenly everybody wanted a rock band from Seattle. We had a little resurgence of rock music here in Seattle. And again, I was kind of right there in the middle of it when it started. But who knew that it would become a big part of the music industry?
I heard Nevermind before it was on the radio. Susie Tennant, who was doing A&R for Geffen and handling Nirvana, played it for me in her car one day, and then I heard it elsewhere, and it was only until I was in the local little kind of co-op grocery store, and I heard it on the radio. And even though it was probably the college station, maybe even, or whatever, but it was just something about, and it was a hippie grocery store, but still, there was something about hearing it in that environment. And then, of course, you started hearing it around, seeing on TV and reading about it everywhere. And so it did have that, it did have this kind of somewhat euphoric, but also somewhat numbing effect at the same time. And it also did bring in a lot of work. All of a sudden we were the hotbed of music, and everybody wanted the next Nirvana.
When Teen Spirit exploded, how did that change your life?
I was already doing pretty well on account of my, all the other records I'd done from the grunge era, meaning the Mudhoney records, the Tad records, the Soundgarden record. I was pretty well on my way with my career when Nevermind blew up, because I'd been doing it since 1986, and Nevermind didn't blow up really until about January of 1992, I think was when it hit the top of the charts. And for the most part, people went back and checked out Bleach at the time and said, well, this doesn't sound like Nevermind, But, the people who were influenced by Mudhoney, they knew what I was doing. They wanted more of that rough, unproduced rock and roll sound that I was doing at the time. This was 30 years ago. The Bleach record has had somewhat of a reappraisal. It seems like more and more people have gone back and they actually are surprised to find that they really like the record.
Some of my favorite Nirvana tracks, for example, are the ones that are not that well known. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
his old age acoustic demo. Like,
I don't know if I know that one off the top of my head.
It's all good, but like a lot of like verse chorus.
Oh yeah,
right?
I think
like,
that's a B-side on one of the singles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and like sometimes I enjoy the B-sides more than the A side.
Yeah, and see, when you knew Kurt and you knew all those people around that, a lot of people played experimental noise music. Part of why Kurt and Nirvana was so great was because he was a lonely kid and he sat at home in his room and spent hour after hour after hour playing guitar and writing all those notes. And then also when he moved to Olympia and lived with Tracy, he hung out with all his kids in college. So we all sat around and talked about the meaning of life and talked about art and creativity. And see, that's the thing about the punk scene, is everybody knew each other. You know, you might not know that person specifically, but it was so small, like in the 80s and 90s, that if you didn't know somebody, you knew somebody from that town, or you knew somebody that knew somebody from that town. We didn't care about what the mainstream was telling us. We didn't believe in that anymore because it was all fake.
Like, I like Nirvana, I like Pink Floyd, I like The Doors, because if you listen to that music, there's a story there. They're talking about their emotions and their feelings, and I feel like today with everything, it's just, look at my car, look at this. It's like, that's it. That's all you hear on the radio.
Yeah.
It's just like, I can't relate to that, you know?
Everything has become an advertising sales pitch, and, you know, that's even the way that people approach art now. And for me personally, in my art, it drives me crazy. Because it's like they want you to synopsize what you're doing in 5 seconds. Well, it's like sometimes art takes a while to, like, get to the point, you know? It's like you should be able to work through it, like spend a few years working on it if it's something that's important to you.
I came up through the underground music scene, through the punk rock scene, and I and my peers in that scene never considered any kind of a professional relationship with music. Like, we were doing music because it was the most exciting thing that we were involved in, and that's how we wanted to spend our time. No one, literally no one, thought that it was a career or that it was a way to make a living, right? So the pressures that we put on ourselves were all self-imposed. Like, you wanted to be awesome. You wanted to make records that were great. You wanted to put on shows that freaked people out, you know? And then, like, the notion of being a professional musician never crossed anybody's mind. As the underground music scene grew, and in the post-punk era, some of the bands that started in that idiom started to achieve some measure of sort of broader cultural acceptance or mainstream success. Then that was when the first interactions with the mainstream music business happened. You had bands like Sonic Youth and Husker Du and the Replacements, who had cut their teeth in the sort of grubby punk rock and underground music scene, but had sort of graduated into a mainstream presence and had been signed to big record labels and were now part of the mainstream music business. And then there was a second generation of those bands that were sort of inspired by that to, like, have professional aspirations, as it were. And that sort of culminated with Nirvana becoming the biggest band in the world. And that sort of started a feeding frenzy with the big record labels, where the big record labels were trying to find other, like, unpolished gems in the underground music scene that they could turn into commodities like that. So the premise that the music business is hard now and it used to be easier rings funny in my ears, because I never once considered it a business. I considered it an artistic enterprise and something that my friends and I cherished as a function of our identity as people who were outside society's norms and outside the conventional career paths.
I think that the musicians from this scene were pretty true to themselves for the most part. I think there are kids making this same music right now, though. I mean, I've seen it in a backyard up the street here a couple summers ago. Everything percolates underground, then it comes back up.
Do you think we can get to a point where rock and roll starts to rise again?
It could be. I don't know what it is. Like, where's the new Clash? Where's the new Nirvana?
I've heard rumors that you were considered to work on In Utero. Is this true?
There were rumors of it reaching me because I know Kurt had talked about wanting to go back to a less produced sound. After Nevermind, I think he wanted something that was a little less slick and less commercial sounding because of the nature of the production and mastering on that record was very radio friendly, which was a little of a shock to the band, I think. There were rumors about it, but I never heard anything directly from the band. And in fact, the first time I talked to Kurt about it, he told me that he was planning on recording with Steve Albini. So I thought, well, that puts that to rest. But I did end up doing some demos for In Utero. They came and said they wanted to record on the 8-track machine and try and just bang some songs out. And unfortunately, we did 6 or 7 songs, and Kurt only did vocals on one of them.
Do you remember which song that was?
It was "Rape Me," and it's on the box set, actually. And the other stuff we did is instrumental, and most of that got released as part of one of the In Utero deluxe reissue packages. I think it's the CD version. Has got some of those instrumental demos, tacked onto the end with some other miscellaneous odds and ends. But no, I mean, the first time I heard about it, it was Kurt telling me they were going to record with Steve Albini. So, that put the rumors to rest for me right away. And I wasn't expecting they would do it with me. They'd already made a record with me.
My background is from the punk underground. Things like competence and virtuosity were not prized. Like it wasn't that you necessarily needed to be ashamed of being good at your instrument, but the mode of expression, that is like being a shredder or being, like a Wicked Chops drummer, that was much, much less important than what you were trying to express and what you were trying to do. A lot of my favorite bands were formed by neophytes with no experience playing music, and they used their creative minds to fashion a vocabulary that they could use themselves to express themselves. And it didn't necessarily map or correspond with what you would be taught by a guitar instructor or what the traditions of music would have valued up to that point.
But there wasn't like a right or a wrong to it. Whatever you did that you liked yourself was what was right. And the more you liked it, the more confident you were, and therefore the more other people liked it. Now it's about the superficial. And I'm not saying everything is that way. It's just harder to find anything that's not, because there's so much out there. But when you try to go through all the different music, it's like I want to like new stuff, and I find stuff I like all the time. But a lot of the stuff I watch is really like, I'm like horrified by it. What I've noticed recently with, because I worked with a bunch of younger people recently, and a lot of them are in bands, and some of them have the attitude of, we learned a song, we made a video, it's on YouTube, now we're rock stars. It's like, wait, you barely even can play that song. So I think they're getting a different kind of attention. Like, by doing the instant gratification video, then they get everyone in their own peer group to like them, and maybe people with that mindset. But if they're trying to impress other people outside of their specific peer group, they would do better to make something that had more of a complete vision in it. And I think that kind of art and music takes time. You have to remember, like, in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't that cool to be a musician and artist. It was thought of that you were like maybe the scum of the earth, or there might be something wrong with you, or you might have mental health issues, if you were doing that, or something that was negative. I think the way since like the year 2000, the internet has changed everything. In society now, it's all about the image and the sales pitch. And a lot of art now, you read the description of it and you think, oh, this sounds like a good art show, I want to go see it. And then you go see it and you find out that the person has spent more time writing the description or the sales pitch for the art show than actually making the works of art that they put up on the wall. And it's so disappointing because it doesn't really have that genuine feel. And it has a feel like an advertising sales pitch instead, And so it's like, I want you to show me your art. I want to see your art and have it move me and have it make me feel something and show me something new that I don't know about, like something that you care about, that is different from what I care about, but might also be similar to what I care about and might relate to me somehow. But I think now it's like more about the surface image. And, you know, I think that is like the death of like really top creativity.
Every musician that I knew that was a peer of mine, that was a friend of mine, that I admired, the people who were my heroes and my inspiration, they all had day jobs. Every one of them, right? That there was a brief period where some of those people could be professional musicians and nothing else was an anomaly. And it struck me then as an anomaly, like, this is freakish, this can't go on forever, you know. So when that feeding frenzy died down and all of the bands that were plucked from the underground into the mainstream, like, very few of those had any measure of success in the mainstream. And the mainstream music business kind of reverted back to form, which was making sort of manufactured pop music.
I always like to talk about how Nirvana and the grunge movement was the last big music movement pre-internet, kind of the digital information age. You know, everything suddenly just centralized instead of like, it took a lot of the kind of the mystery out of it.
After around the year 2000, and now this is I have to point this out.
Sure.
I had made, you know, probably a couple hundred records already by the time the year 2000 came about, and 97% of everything I recorded, period, everything, got released by some indie label somewhere during that period. Sometimes years later, you know, sometimes it was records that didn't get released at the time, but somebody would come along and go, oh, this is historically interesting, we're going to put this out. So seriously, almost everything I touched for 10 years got released by an indie label somewhere. You know, it was all indie work for me and work in other countries for major labels, which was ironic. But my point is, the indie labels kind of dried up after the turn of the century. And yet I'm just as busy recording now as I ever was, if not more so. But people just put records out themselves.
How did you get into the business? Did, for example, Skin Yard come before engineering? Like, what was your story?
My story was I started recording even before I was really a serious musician. Right from the first time I was, playing in a band. It wasn't even a band. I was basically jamming with some friends. I was a drummer. That was my first instrument that I had any competency on. And right from almost from day one, I would set up a pair of microphones going into a little cassette deck I had that had 2 microphone inputs on it. And I would record every jam, because if you didn't have a recording, you didn't have any proof that you had actually played music if there wasn't a recording of it. I had to have proof that I was actually maybe possibly becoming a musician. So it was extremely interesting to me to listen back to what I was doing while I was jamming with my friends in a garage on Bainbridge Island. It was terrible music, of course, but the point was it existed, it was music, and we were actually playing it. And I thought, well, God, I sound kind of like a drummer. Maybe I could do this musician thing. But at the same time, I was recording right from day one. I was always, whenever I was playing music, the red light was always on, as we used to say. I was used to always having some recording thing going on, whether it was just a mic hanging from the wall, anything. And as soon as I got 2 cassette decks, I started bouncing tracks back and forth between the 2 cassette decks, using a Y cable to combine things, 2 channels into one. And so I guess I was interested in recording. The two things happened at the same time for me: becoming a musician, switching to bass, becoming a guitar player. All the while I was recording constantly. By the time I had a chance to buy a 4-track reel-to-reel machine, it was a Tascam. No, excuse me, a TIAC. A TIAC 3340S 4-track that I picked up in 1980. that was like the greatest thing in the world to me, because I didn't have to bounce tracks anymore. And I got a little 6-channel mixing board and a couple of microphones, and, set up in my basement where, I was jamming with people, and it was suddenly I had a little studio. And when Skin Yard started a few years later, I would record every practice, just in case something unintentionally brilliant came about, I would have a record of it. And that's actually how we wrote a lot of songs. Really? Because I would have, we would just start jamming on something, and I'd say, wait, that riff there, we got to record that. And then later we'd come back to it. Smart. Because it's if you didn't record it at the time, you would just forget it. It would be gone.
Yeah. And were you guys officially Skin Yard at that point, or were you still friends jamming with each other?
The band started, we didn't have a band name for the first few months, but my first jam with Daniel House on bass, and we had actually a drummer named Greg Gilmore at the time. He only was with us for a short time. But that was, I think, New Year's Day of 1985 was the first rehearsal of what would become Skin Yard, actually. And we didn't get our singer, Ben McMillan, until a couple months later. Matt Cameron joined the band as a drummer, I think, in late February of 1985. And I think we played our first gig as Skin Yard. It was May or June of 1985. I can't really remember right now. There's a website that has all the chronology on it. But I was recording the whole time. I didn't actually start working in a real studio until summer of 1986, which was Reciprocal Recording, that our friend Chris Hanzik had opened the studio. And I said, hey, not only have I been recording in my basement for a long time, but I know a lot of musicians, I'll bring them into your studio. Let me work at your studio. And he's great.
Why did you guys close that down, if I may ask?
It outgrew the space. The building is not very big. And when the studio started, it was mainly Chris and myself doing the engineering. And when the studio started, it was an 8-track setup. And then we got really busy, and Chris had the money to buy a 16-track, and that got busy. And then we got a 24-track machine. But the studio wasn't very big. The building wasn't a particularly great building. The control room was too small. It just was not, and in my opinion, never was a really ideal building to put a studio in. It was a good location. There were no neighbors. You had no problem with noise complaints. Well, I had one once, but, it was a funky old building that didn't really have any other purpose other than a recording studio. It was literally triangular shaped. But Chris felt it was time to move on from that space. And eventually he found another building, and he ran it as Hanzik Audio for over a decade, I think. And now he's moved out of Seattle, and he mostly just does mastering. HanzikAV.com. I still send him things if I don't feel like mastering something, or maybe I've mixed it and I'd rather have someone more objective do the mastering. I always send it to Chris. He's been mastering longer than anybody here in Seattle. But I do a lot of mastering myself now, too.
How did you end up becoming the grunge guy, so to speak?
How did I end up becoming the grunge guy? Well, how did we end up becoming grunge? I mean, it was all just sort of like, we were all interested in music, and, some of us couldn't play it, so we did photography, and then there were others who did the graphic design and art, and of course Bruce and John, who knew business a little bit and wanted to run a label, and so of Sub Pop. So at first it was just we created our own industry here to a degree, because we were separated from the industries of New York and LA and elsewhere. So Sub Pop at one point did the brilliant thing of flying in an English journalist to then write this huge piece, which of course then if people like, oh my God, well they're writing about him in England, let's check it out, So it just kind of steamrolled that way. It was a very organic process.
The kids that I meet that love Kurt, I love them because a lot of them are really beautiful kids. You know, like I have a lot of photos in my book of kids that I've met.
I saw that one kid who's like a big Nirvana fan. He kind of lives in a tent on a hill or something.
That's my friend James, and he is from, I want to say North Carolina. It could be South Carolina, but I think it's North Carolina.
One of the Carolinas.
And he was in a band, and he and his then girlfriend, who's now his wife, and their best friend came here in their old beat-up car because he loved Kurt so much. And I was working at the Seattle Weekly shooting news photographs, and that was the first tent city. So it was the first camp for homeless people here in Seattle. And anyway, they sent me out to photograph Tent City, and I met James. I was excited because he had a Nirvana t-shirt on, but it wasn't like he'd made it himself.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so I started talking to him about Nirvana, and he started talking about Nirvana. And so I made friends with him, and then after I was done with the shoot, like, you know, I went away and turned in my photo and everything, and then I decided to go back and visit him and his friend and his girlfriend, and they were in the tent, and I said, I want to come back and take photos of you. And then there was like a barbecue area, because they were camped in a park on Beacon Hill, and you know, there was that scenic view, right? Yeah. With I think it's the Kingdom still in that picture, isn't it?
Maybe, I don't remember.
I'll have to look and see. But anyways, I think it's the Kingdom before they tore down the old stadium. And it just was really scenic, so I wanted to come back and take photos of him because in some ways he looks a lot like Kurt Cobain. Like, I totally made him look like Kurt Cobain in the photograph.
The wig and that kind of thing, right?
No, he doesn't have a wig.
Oh,
it's just his hair. Like, it's bleached out. Like, he's like an 18-year-old kid. Physically, in person, he's like nothing like Kurt. He's like much taller and much larger person than Kurt was.
That's funny.
But he just was channeling Kurt because he loved Kurt so much. And they drove out to Aberdeen. They used their last pennies to get out to Aberdeen and check it out, right? And then he like came back to Seattle, and then they ended up at the homeless camp. Then they got jobs. And then they stayed around here for a couple of years, like maybe a year and a half or something like that, and kind of had their Nirvana adventure and stuff. And then they went back and got married, and now they have 2 daughters.
That's amazing.
Here in Seattle, I don't know what's going to come in the door here at the studio next. It could be anything. It could be garage, it could be punk, it could be psych, or it could be metal. None of them are at the top of the charts. None of them are on commercial radio. KEXP might play some of it, though.
Is that why, do you think perhaps people are saying rock is dead because of this kind of scenario?
Yeah, it's been driven back underground economically again. You go into a bank and you hear what they're playing over the speakers. It's usually some sort of processed pop music. I can hear the auto-tune very clearly. You know, when I walk into the bank, they're always playing some commercial AM station or something. And yeah, you can hear the auto-tune, you can hear the drum machine. I can hear the fact that it was all done on a grid. And it's a completely alien aesthetic from the way I make recordings. I've been to Brazil several times. I've been to Chile many times. I've been to Argentina. And what seems to have been in common is that all these countries had military dictatorships that started winding down around the middle of the 80s or the late 80s. And these were kind of controlled societies where, the music that was available to them on its digital commercial radio, it's of course coming from the internet, was kind of controlled. All you could hear was the safe stuff, the culturally approved local pop music and maybe, your Beatles and Stones and some classic rock and that sort of thing. And when these various dictatorships fell, the young people suddenly had the whole history of pop, the whole history of rock and roll suddenly was available to them. And, like, for instance, in Chile, when Pinochet fell, I was told this by a young Chileno. Some of the first music they heard was the Seattle music that I was doing here, like Nirvana, Mudhoney, that sort of thing. And, it made a big impression on them. It was sort of the sound of freedom, if you will, which sounds really corny, but that was the words that were used when this was described to me. So they love their rock and roll in South America because it's the sound of dictatorships falling, really, in a lot of ways. It still has a sort of a revolutionary kind of association to it because during the dictatorships, you could be thrown in jail for being in a rock band. That was considered subversive, and it wasn't something, you wanted to risk. So there was a lot of danger associated with playing rock and roll during the dictatorships. So the South Americans have a real appreciation for rock. This is a Latin Grammy, so that's what these things look like. And
That's amazing.
The funny thing is,
No way, they come off.
Yeah, it comes apart.
Is that the same
You're not
with...
supposed to do that. I don't
Wow,
think.
that's funny.
Yeah, it is funny. I'm an engineer. I take things apart and then I put them together again.
Did you learn that by accident? Or
I did, actually. The thing just came unscrewed one day.
Wow.
So, yeah, there it is. So who knew, initially was known as a grunge guy, gets a Grammy for a Brazilian pop record. A Brazilian record that I did for an artist named Nando Reis. He was the bass player for Titãs for many years, and then he went solo in around 2001, 2002, and has had, I made 4 albums with the band Titãs when Nando was in the band, and then I've worked on 3 or 4 of his solo albums, and this was for a record that I made called Jardim Pomar a couple of years ago. I think it's dated 2017. And I was the co-producer with Barrett Martin, and I also mixed the record, and in fact I played some guitar on the record as well. The very first note you hear on the first song of the record is my guitar.
Really?
And the record did very, very well in Brazil, and hence my Grammy.
That's
for
amazing.
Being the Produtor e Engenheiro.
Can you read that at all?
Academia Latina de Arts e Sciences de Gravação. Gravação, actually. See, I've been in Spanish-speaking countries for a while lately, and so my Portuguese accent is a little bit corrupted now.
Do you prefer Spanish or Portuguese?
I learned a lot of Portuguese I spent a lot of time in Brazil, and I almost got to the point where I could speak Portuguese. And it now affects me when I try and speak Spanish. Half the time it comes out Portuguese and just becomes a huge comedy. I'm sure my Spanish-speaking friends are really tired of hearing about it.
That's funny.
But Jack Endino, Produtor e Engenheiro, Melhor Álbum de Rock ou de Música Alternativa em Língua Portuguesa 2017, or for Jardim Pomar by the artist Nando Reis.